Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, warders, lauders and junk hoarders, welcome along to the Joe Spivey YouTube channel where we discuss books and little else. And you join me in, as ever, the northernmost region of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which is frankly a burgeoningly beautiful day here. It's sun aplenty, it's absolutely magnificent. You join me once more for another instalment of our non-fiction November, our BookTube event, I believe originally organised by Olive at a BookTube Olive. So for all you neurotic idiots that don't read any non-fiction, we are hereby encouraging you to read some, and for the more discerning BookTube viewer who already reads some, you essentially need to chain yourself to the desk of non-fiction November and read nothing but that. And so yes, you have my latest instalment today with Messer Christopher Hitchens with his 2001 collection of missives, Letters to a Young Contrarian, which I'll get into in due course in just one moment. But as per usual, I'm going to give you a little bit of a slice of the zeitgeist, because that is my want every now and then. And well, this weekend, if perhaps I am lacking somewhat in my usual celerity or vivacity, or if I'm not quite grabbing you from the clutches of your sofa or your bed as per usual, that may be because I was what we might call making rather merry at the weekend, and as a result, for the last few days I've been tired, I've not been getting much sleep, I have been, as per usual, as happens after that type of abuse, I have been Raskolnikov with in my own little cocoon of existential angst and whatnot. But I do have two things that I just want to bring up. First of all, I watched a very bizarre interview between the leader of His Majesty's government, Rishi Sunak, in this country, at an AI safety summit or conference with the famously devilish Elon Musk. I thought it was a perfect little microcosm of our society, just because of how, what would you say, just because of, not for anything poignant that was said in the interview or anything that was discussed, but just for how, how sycophantic Rishi Sunak was to the tech giant, when really it should be that the legislators are the ones that are getting their feet kissed, when in fact, of course, it is these technological geniuses that are. So I thought that was very interesting. It was about a 45-minute video, which they discussed about. Elon Musk said that they're going to take all of our jobs and everything's going to be over. We've already discussed superintelligence on this channel. I don't want to get into it anymore. But then I also saw, again, I've discussed this with Steve Donoghue on his channel before, about the Dude Bro channels that we follow. Chris Williamson, who is a Geordie from even further north than you joined me in Newcastle, he has released a drink called, I think it's called New Tonic, as in nootropic but tonic. It's all very clever marketing. But I thought, for a channel that has thought to dispel many myths about certain aspects of pharmacology that could be useful for you, or who wants to really get down to the bare bones of humanity, and who is obsessed with like lots of these sort of primal chest poundings, to come out with a drink that would then seek to contravene every single thing that he has said beforehand, which is all about, getting close to nature and not drinking alcohol and not being addictive to substances, to bring out a drink with what's in there? Cognizins in there, there's all sorts of, a load of caffeines in there, to bring out a drink that, as I say, would seek to contravene all of his tenets and much of his, if you could, enliven much of what he does by calling it a philosophy. I thought that was bizarre. And then, so I checked, just out of curiosity, for the said drink on Amazon, and a 12-pack of New Tonic is, it's only £50 sterling. Which I found to be horrendous. So you're going to have to spend, if you do become addicted to such a thing, then you're going to have to spend about £1,200 on that. It's full of blandishments on the can, which talks about boosted cognition and increased attention. So for all those people that struggle to sit and read for an hour at a time and don't realise that in order to sit and read for an hour at a time, you need to sit and read for an hour at a time, rather than thinking and talking about sitting and reading for an hour at a time. Those people are going to have to spend thousands of pounds per year supping on some sort of weird sputum that Chris Williamson is going to profit off, but that's my opinion on the matter. Anyway, you join me, ladies and gentlemen, once more for Non-Fiction November, and this is Mr. Hitchens. Now, the usual avenue through which many people will contact Mr. Hitchens was not the avenue that I came across. He is a darling of the combative atheists, the secularizers that now dominate much of political discussion, both here and abroad. And he has literally thousands of hours of content whereby he quite rightly lambasts and lampoons on some of the idiocies of the monotheisms. He seems to appeal to young, adrenalised young men who haven't even read a sentence or chapter, let alone a book, in the last 12 months, yet they have 4 of his volumes on their shelves. Most of his videos have gone completely viral. Lots of his sophistry and casuistry and downright rudeness at a pulpit has been made famous by YouTube's algorithms, and, as I say, adrenalised young men that want to be viscerally activated by somebody they deem to be intelligent. So that's my opinion of Christopher. Now, this book in particular was released in 2001 as part of a series by, I think it might have been Basic Books. Basic Books are certainly the guys that published this, which is this is essentially a collection of missives. But I would rather prefer to call it a sort of long and yet disjointed peroration on the art of being a contrarian. First of all, he talks about how difficult it is to taxonomize himself or taxonomize the contrarian. He doesn't like the word dissident, doesn't like the word polemicist, doesn't like the word controversialist for obvious reasons. So that's what he goes on about for a little while, and they try to mediate. I don't know how. It's really weird. I don't know what Christopher wrote this for, apart from for profit. He talks about standing against the tide and the willingness to seek to controvert the tyranny of the majority, and being a free thinker and being independent and all of the other things that a normal person would want to be. Unfortunately, most of it happens just to build upon and try to flesh out in a very supercilious and circumlocucious way what an 8-year-old would ordinarily automatically think. There's not much actual grown-up, mature, well-spun reasoning going on in here. It's just Christopher thinking what he has thought for the last 40 years whilst writing this, or 20 or 30 years whilst writing this, and penning it down. There's a few things that I want to highlight in here, and then I want to get into the myth, the life, the legend of Mr. Hitchens. I've got a few other books here that feature him or have him on them, and I want to talk about that as well. But yeah, just a few things in here. First of all, he's very good at goading readers in. So there's just a very short paragraph here that I want to highlight. So this is in the first one where he's setting out his stall, not doing it very well, doesn't tell us much about what he's going to do, and then doesn't do what he's not going to do very well. It may be that you, my dear X, that's what he calls readers, recognise something of yourself in these instances, a disposition to resistance, however slight, against arbitrary authority or witless mass opinion, or a thrill of recognition when you encounter some well-wrought phrase from a free intelligence. Now, of course, everybody would like to regard themselves as somebody with a disposition to resistance or against arbitrary authority or witless mass opinion. Every self-regarding human being would want to find themselves in that group, and so he is very cleverly and cunningly dragging you in. He is in his right. First of all, who was? I think it was. This is typical in typical Hitchens fashion. I'm going to invoke somebody else. Was it Nabokov that said, "I think like a genius, write like a distinguished author, and speak like a child"? If anything, Hitchens is antithetical to that. He's the polar opposite of that. He probably thought like a child, obviously wrote like a reasonably distinguished thinker or writer, and spoke like a genius. He is magnificent at as I say, goading an audience, at enlivening an audience, at being on a pulpit and extemporaneously just dishing out information that he's probably pre-prepared in advance, which is rather like I do on here. But yes, as he obviously has a little, occasional digs at religion in this. He is very cunning in that he sets up some rather weird straw men. So, for example, he talks about I don't know whether you've noticed, but religion's quite instructional and offers prescriptions and tells you what to do. He then thematically links that with the idea of a totalitarian doctrinal regime, which of course is nonsense, because if ever you have somebody that gives out instructions or prescriptions, if you were then to deem that a totalitarian regime, that would be nonsense. A father and a mother and an auntie and a teacher and a bus driver and a taxi man and somebody who runs an advice clinic would also be authoritarians by that rubric, which is obviously nonsense. So that's just some of the casuistry and sophistry that I don't like about Hitchens. It's obvious that it isn't anything that's really well-meaning or anything that's really fundamental and deep-held inside of him. He's just trying to turn a quick buck, I think. But here are a few more examples. This links heavily to what I'm going to talk about a little bit later. I'm trying to look for something. There are bits that he talks about where he is essentially openly dishonest, where he talks about looking at New York Times articles every day, which he obviously doesn't do at all. But there's clearly literary talent involved in there, but it's not something that I would recommend to you on a mass scale. So he talks about how to ward off atrophy and routine, you ask. Well, I can give you a small and perhaps ridiculous example. Every day, the New York Times carries a motto in a box on its front page. All the news that's fit to print, it says. It's been saying it for decades, day in and day out. I imagine that most readers of the canonical sheet have long ceased to notice this bannered and flaunted symbol of its mental furniture. I myself check every day to make sure that the bright, smug, pompous, idiotic claim is still there. He didn't and never would have checked every single day that the New York Times had such a bright, smug, pompous, idiotic claim. Yada yada yada. You may wish to choose a more rigorous mental workout, but I credit this daily infusion of annoyance with extending my lifespan. Which brings us on to our final little... Well, I just want to go on to one of the back end of this, which is called Envoy for some reason, the last section. He talks about... Well, he essentially has a little go at pedagogy and gives out instructions, which by his own rubric would make him an authoritarian that is all-seeing and all-knowing and all-doing. So in the final bit, he gives sort of little tidbits of advice. Beware the irrational, however seductive. Shun the transcendent and all who invite you to subordinate or annihilate yourself. Distrust compassion, prefer dignity for yourself and others. Don't be afraid to be thought arrogant or selfish. Picture all experts as if they were mammals. Never be a spectator of unfairness or stupidity. Seek out argument and disputation for their own sake. The grave will supply plenty of time for silence. Suspect your own motives and all excuses. Do not live for others any more than you would expect others to live for you. I mean, this is just crackpot nonsense. What is he... Everything that he has said over the last 150 pages has just been completely eradicated by a load of, mumbling nonsense. What else did he say? Just a few pages beforehand. Again, something ridiculously self-evident. The high ambition, therefore, seems to me to be this, that one should strive to combine the maximum of impatience with the maximum of scepticism, the maximum of hatred of injustice and irrationality with the maximum of ironic self-criticism. This would mean really deciding to learn from history rather than invoking it or sloganising it. No idea. Again, just general stuff that an 8-year-old would realise, and he's just couching it in ridiculous academic scholarly posturing prose that I'm not a huge fan of. But I think it would be interesting, which is going to lead on to my final point. Were Christopher Hitchens still here today, I think he would obviously be at complete odds with what we might term radical woke movements who prioritise subjectivity over everything else. You can call yourself what you want. He sees and sort of draws in upon the very early stages of identity politics in the 80s and the 90s, and is very prescient on how demonstrably idiotic and neurotic that will become in our modern era. But, ladies and gents, shall we consider for a moment just why Christopher isn't here anymore? Because there is a common theme whenever he is depicted in the modern media. Here we have him, obviously, on Letters to a Young Contrarian. That is a cigarette there. This is a copy of Hitch 22, his memoir, which is largely no good. The only good section is when he discusses Martin Amis. There again, that is a picture of Christopher who doesn't appear to be holding a cigarette, but nonetheless definitely has one in his hand. It's just down below. This is a copy of Martin Amis's Inside Story. I believe this is obviously the British cover to it. There is said Amis, and there is Mr. Hitchens, a very young gentleman, oh look, with a cigarette in his hand. For somebody who was seemingly so very concerned with emancipation of certain political entourages or groups or certain races or ethnicities, he found himself in the clutches of the worst and most deleterious authoritarian organisation that we know of today, which is Big Tobacco. Those things, that thing that he is holding up there, means that he cannot countenance 90 minutes of normal life without going out into some windswept, horrible car park and smoking himself silly and reducing his life by a quarter of an hour every time he does so. That is why he is not alive to rightly lambast any of the ideological fallacies of the left or the right these days, is because he's dead from cancer, because the cigarettes that he smoked for the entirety of his life, you know, from cradle to coffin, have killed him. The same with Martin Amis, the person who I have to credit with pretty much introducing me to excitable reading, again, died a few months ago from esophageal cancer, which was completely and utterly avoidable if he hadn't indulged in a neurochemical addiction for his entire life. Which is a real shame. But yeah, that was my little review of a Letters of a Young Contrarian. Not a huge fan. I've read God Is Not Great, Hitch 22. This was another reread. I've done something else. Yeah, there was something on Mother Teresa, wasn't there? Yeah, but again, nothing's ever done it for me. It all seems really performative and fundamentally dishonest. He was a really pleasant speaker. Obviously, he'd been a great dinner guest. Drunk himself and smoked himself silly, and unfortunately is a poor role model for most people who, as I say, haven't read a book in the last year and for some reason idolise him. But yes, that is our non-fiction November for today. My next read for this marvellous event was going to be Posh Boys by Robert, I think, Vercake, about the what would you say, institutional idiosyncrasies of private schools in the UK, fee-paying schools, and how they dominate much of the media landscape. I appear to have mislaid that. It's completely gone. Vanished into thin air. It is now not part of our material reality. It's gone. I don't know where it is. I've had a right good route around for it and I can't find it. But I have a replacement. We have someone to step in, an honourable mention, which is Gideon Haig's On the Ashes. Whenever I am asked, I'm not asked very often, but when somebody asks me for a living, breathing writer that nobody is talking about, but is still producing lots of good content and lots of good, writing, I always draw them to Mr. Haig. This is a book on cricket between what is it? It's a biannual. Is it a biannual competition between England and Australia in cricket, which takes place in England and Australia on various occasions. Mr. Haig is excellent at doing this, so this is going to be my next read. Cricket is, of course, baseball for grown-ups, so yes, it'll be a jolly good to read. This will be another reread. I have done this before, and I'll happily flick through this over the next week or so. But yes, I think that's just about me. Thank you very much for watching BookTube. Keep your comments coming, love. Keep your comments coming. I do always enjoy talking about bookish stuff on my channel. So yes, please do comment. That's you there that thinks I'm not talking to you, that I'm talking about a universal you. I actually mean you sat there. Please comment and tell me what you think about Christopher Hitchens. Do you like him? Have you ever read him? But yeah, thank you ever so much for watching BookTube, and that is me.